Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is 2024 presidential contender Larry Elder. Larry, thanks for coming on.
Brittany, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, you jumped into a jam packed presidential race filled with current and past governors, senators, even a former president and vice president. So, my first question is to you: why are you the person for the job?
Well, first of all, it wasn't as jam-packed when I got into it, but since I got into it, a lot more people have got into it. Look, I'm running because I feel that I've got some things to say that I believe our party is not talking enough about, if at all. Most notably, there is an epidemic of fatherlessness in our country. And I consider that to be, Brittany, the most pressing domestic problem in the country. We have lots of issues, whether it's taxes, whether it's too much regulations, whether it's porous borders, whether it's gasoline prices. There are lots of things to talk about. But the number one social problem, in my opinion, the 10,000-pound elephant in the room, is the large number of kids who enter the world today in America without a father in the home. 40% of all American kids do. That's up threefold from the mid 60s when Democrat Lyndon Johnson launched the so called war on poverty. At that time, 25% of black kids entered the world without a father in the home married to the mother. Fast forward, that is now 70%. 50% in the Hispanic community, 25% in the white community. And the stats are clear. If you're raised without a dad, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. I've got some ideas about what we can do about that. The other reason I'm running is because somebody needs to thoroughly denounce this Democrat gambit of saying that the country is systemically racist. It drives the debate on critical race theory. It drives the debate on reparations. It drives the debate on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is not only untrue, it is not only pitting Americans against Americans, it is a murderous lie. It's called the George Floyd effect. This is, Brittany, the phenomenon of cops pulling back for fear of being called systemically racist. And as a result, crime has gone up all over the country. There are literally thousands of people who've been victimized by violent crime who otherwise would not have been victimized had the police been doing their normal proactive policing. And the people that are primarily victimized by this excess crime are very black and brown people living in the inner city that people on the left purport to care about. And then the other big issue I want to bring to the table is the absolute crisis of urban education. Just to choose one city, Baltimore, there are 13 public high schools in Baltimore, Brittany, I kid you not, where 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. Another half a dozen, only 1% can. That's half of all the public high schools in Baltimore, all located in the inner city. Chicago, 53 government schools, 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. Why is this acceptable? Why is it acceptable we have an epidemic of fatherlessness? Why is it acceptable that we are in a nation where racism has never been a less significant factor, talking about it all the time because Democrats want to get black people angry about social justice and equity, however you define that, and not talking about crime or bad schools? And why is it okay for 85% of black eighth graders, according to the National Report Card? These are kids who are 13 years old, can neither read nor do math at grade level. Half can't even do basic reading, which means a substantial percentage of black 13-year-olds in America are functionally illiterate. Why in the world is this acceptable? It is not. And I want to put these issues front and center.
I hear how passionate you are, and I do want to read you some stats that Insider did gather up just a few months ago, and I want to get your thoughts on them. You point blank said you don't believe there's systemic racism in America. Just listen to these
Not
stats.
anymore.
Not
Yeah,
anymore.
not anymore.
Black Americans are underrepresented in high paying jobs compared to white and Asian Americans, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the median incomes of black families is almost $30,000 less than white families, and overall poverty rate for black families is more than double white families. Black mortgage applicants are denied for loans more often than white, Hispanic, and Asian applicants, per the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And the U.S. Census Bureau in 2021 found that 37.9% of white Americans 25 and older have college degrees compared to 28.1% of black Americans in that same age range. So when you hear those stats, you don't believe that systemic racism is in America anymore. So what would you attribute these numbers to?
Oh, for crying out loud. Disparities do not mean systemic racism. Disparities mean disparities. For example, a black married man has the same unemployment rate as do whites. What is stopping a black person from going to a college or university? The things that you mentioned are disparities. Tell me how these disparities are because of racism. You mentioned mortgage applications. It is true that blacks are turned down at a higher rate for mortgages than whites. It's also true that Asians are turned down less often than whites. How do you explain that? How do you explain that Chinese Americans who were victimized by racism? In fact, they were the first nationality to be excluded by the Chinese Immigration Act. How do you explain that they have a higher net income than do whites? How do you explain that Japanese Americans have a higher household income than do whites? How do you explain that Korean Americans have a higher net income than do whites? How do you explain Nigerian Americans have a higher net income, household income than do whites? These are matters of behavior, matters of choices. There's nothing stopping anybody black from succeeding in America. There are think tanks on the left, like the Brookings Institution, and on the right, like the American Enterprise Institute, and they both give the same formula for success. Finish high school. Don't have a kid before you're 20 years old. Get married first. Get a job. Keep that job. Don't quit it until you get another job. And I would add one more thing, and that is avoid the criminal justice system. You do those things, you will not be poor.
So how do you explain these disparities? You said disparities are disparities. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you decide not to go to college, then you say that black people are not in college. If you make a decision not to do something that results in you having less income, how do you call that some sort of systemic racism? You might want to make an argument that people ought to change their behavior, that there should be a greater emphasis on education. For example, look at a graph of how much homework an average black kid spends in high school per night compared to the average amount of homework a Hispanic kid does, compared to the average homework a white kid does, compared to the average homework an Asian American kid does. And it's night and day when you compare what blacks do per night on homework versus whites or versus Asians. If you argue that there is a relationship between how hard you work and results, it seems to me you ought to be talking about why people aren't working harder rather than criticizing the disparate results that stem from that.
So are you saying that the reason why more black
I don't know.
people...
I don't know why. Honestly, Brittany, I don't know why this is complicated. What I'm saying is, in America, if you decide that you want to work hard, go to high school, graduate, and then go to a college or a junior college first, and then graduate, nothing will stop you. I mean, virtually every Fortune 500 company has some sort of diversity consultant or some sort of outreach program. They're all looking for to diversify their workforce. What's the evidence that corporate America somehow is discriminating against qualified black people? I went to law school, graduated in 1977. My roommate was an engineering student. He majored in computer engineering. He was recruited like a rock star. He was recruited like a high school prep star. He could do anywhere he wanted to. He could go anywhere he wanted to work. I ended up working at TRW, had a very long career. He had a study mate who was also black, and they both majored in computer engineering. And the study mate went to Procter & Gamble, had a very long, successful career. Corporations were lining up for them. Corporations are looking for qualified people, particularly people who are in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. These are the high demand areas, and unfortunately, a large percentage of blacks aren't majoring in those areas. So if you're not doing the kinds of things that corporate America wants, don't be shocked when corporate America doesn't give you a job. I don't understand why this is complicated.
Do you think it's an equal playing field for all Americans, regardless of race, then, to achieve that American dream?
Brittany, it's not an equal playing field in your own house. I don't know if you have any siblings, but I doubt that your siblings are equally successful, even though you had the same parents, but at the same schools. What makes you think that we're supposed to have equal outcomes? Is the NBA equal? 85, 95% or so of the players are black. I'd say the same thing about the NFL. Baseball has a substantial percentage of Latin ball players. How do you explain that? Is there some sort of systemic racism against white people who don't make it to the NBA? If you do not embrace math, you don't embrace science, you don't embrace the higher paying careers, you're not going to have a higher paid career.
According to a recent Washington Post Ipsos poll, 51% of black Americans do believe that racism will get worse over the course of their lifetime. Let's say you're president. What do you say to those Americans?
Racism has never been a less important factor in American life. This is the only country, majority white country, that's elected and reelected a black president. The formula, as I just now mentioned, for success is very simple. Finish high school. Don't have a kid before you're 20 years old. Get married first. Why do you suppose, as you and I are speaking, Brittany, Haitians in Haiti are lining up for a lottery to get into this country? Because America is systemically racist, because they know this is a land of opportunity. That's why people want to come here. I mean, I don't buy into this notion that America somehow is trying to hold people back. It's in everybody's best interest for black people to do well. Tell me how it is systemically racist when you look at stats on crime. For example, a young black man aged 10 to 43 is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man. Is that because of systemic racism? Is that because of white supremacy or white nationalists, as Joe Biden implied when he was at Howard University? And he said the number one threat to the homeland was white supremacy. Nonsense. There's a connection between the kind of pathology we're seeing in the inner city and the lack of fathers in the home. In 1940, for example, where there was virulent racism, 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. 20 years later, 1960, that number had fallen to 47%. A 40-point drop in 20 years, the greatest 20-year period of economic growth for black Americans in history. Why? Because it was rare for a black child to be born outside of wedlock, a belief in Judeo-Christian values, a belief in the work ethic, a belief in entrepreneurship. Fast forward, you have an organization like Black Lives Matter, where on their website they attack the nuclear family. The co-founders are self-described trained Marxists. Marx was somebody who did not believe in God, wanted to dethrone God, and obviously didn't believe in entrepreneurship because he didn't believe in private property. So all the things that allow black people to keep moving forward after slavery, in the face of the KKK, in the face of Jim Crow, are now under assault. And people who should know better are telling black people that they're victims of systemic racism. It is nonsense. In fact, it is insulting. My father never knew his biological father, was kicked out of the house at the age of 13 by his irresponsible mother. Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow South at the beginning of the Great Depression. My father cleaned toilets for a living, 2 full-time jobs, cooked for a family on the weekend because he wanted my mom to be a stay-at-home mom, and he went to night school to get his GED, and after getting his GED, he went to night school to learn how to operate a small restaurant, which he started in his late 40s, ran until his mid-80s. When my dad retired, he owned the property where the restaurant was, the property next door, plus the house that's still in our family. So my dad retired, he was a millionaire. 8th grade dropout, Athens, Georgia, born 50 years after the Civil War. Give me a break. And right now in 2023, you give me these disparities and you imply the disparities are because of systemic racism when they're not. Disparities are because of behavior, choices people make. They should make superior choices. And what these so-called leaders ought to be doing is informing people that they should make better choices instead of saying you're a victim. I resent it. And it seems to me it is offensive to the history of this country and offensive to hardworking men and women of my dad's era who endured far more serious obstacles than kids today are facing.
I hear how angry this topic is making you. I'm sure the viewers hear that as well. And you said that as if you were president, fatherlessness in this country would be your top issue. That's interesting to me because how would you, what would you do?
What I said was I want to bring to the table issues that we're not talking about. The economy would be my top issue.
Sure, just one, of course, and we will get to the economy in just a moment. But what would you do to keep fathers in the home? Because that seems like a family issue.
Well, again, it's an issue about decisions and about choices, and we need to talk about that. It is, in my opinion, the moral equivalent of a drive-by shooting to bring a child into the world that you're not prepared to feed, clothe, house, and educate. I am urging all the people of my generation, the baby boom generation, these are people who are retiring or about ready to retire, who are vigorous, who are fit, who've raised children, who've nurtured grandchildren, who have life experience, and I'm urging them all to become mentors for men and women who are growing up in America without fathers. There are lots of programs, national programs, local programs, church programs where people can get involved. I'm also going to propose legislation to allow you to direct your tax dollars that go for welfare to organizations in your own community, churches in your own community. There are lots of organizations. They need resources, they need manpower, and for you to be able to direct your funds there where the people are in the neighborhoods doing counseling, often going door to door doing counseling, where the results are going to be far more effective, where people are going to be far more likely to be put on a path towards independence rather than dependent on welfare.
You did mention that economy is the top issue for you, and that is also the top issue for many Americans. According to a recent Economist YouGov poll, these are the top issues that Americans feel that are very important to them: inflation and prices, jobs and the economy, and healthcare. What's your pitch to Americans when it comes to these issues?
Well, we're overtaxed, we're overregulated. I would reduce taxes, I would reduce regulation. And regarding healthcare, the reason our healthcare costs are so high is because government's involved. Government pays almost 50% of our healthcare costs. Healthcare is a commodity like anything else. The more competition, the cheaper the price, the better the quality, the greater the accessibility.
And I do now want to go through a little bit of a lightning round, if you will, with me about the issues. Let's jump to international policy and start with China. I've had the opportunity to talk to a few of your contenders, your competitors, and they both said that we are currently in a Cold War with China. Would you agree?
I would agree. China is our number one adversary. They have infiltrated this country like a Trojan horse. They've endowed all these China chairs all over America, college and universities, to, in my opinion, indoctrinate students into not believing that China is the oppressive authoritarian regime that it is. They bought farmland near sensitive military installations. They have police stations all over America. As you know about the hot air balloons that they sent over, they're saber rattling against Taiwan. They're stealing technology. Or making it a requirement that you divulge your technology if you do work in China. And they want to dominate the world economically and if not militarily. They are a huge, huge problem, huge, huge threat. We ought to be decoupling ourselves from China. We shouldn't be dependent on China for pharmaceuticals as we are, or for military components as we are, or for the stuff that goes into our cell phones, the lithium. It's a huge mistake. It's also a huge mistake on the part of people like Joe Biden to push EVs, because they will make us even more dependent upon China, because the stuff that goes into the batteries, the lithium, the cobalt, the nickel, either mined or produced in China or mined or produced in areas around the world that China controls, like the Republic of the Congo, where you have kids using their bare hands getting this nickel out of the ground. It's adverse to their health. It's toxic. It's also a huge humanitarian crisis. And the notion that EVs on par are better for the environment than gas-powered cars, I reject. When you look at the energy it takes to manufacture the EV, to transport the EV, the shelf life of the battery has to be disposed of some sort of way. You put it in the ground, it leaks toxic materials that threaten our underground water supply. On par, I don't believe an EV is better for the environment than a gasoline-powered car. And so I would stop this incessant push for forcing Americans against their will into buying something that they don't want to buy.
President Biden did call Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator. One, do you agree with that characterization? And two, under an elder presidency, how would you do what you described as decouple the U.S. from China?
Of course, the Xi Jinping is a dictator, and of course, China is an authoritarian regime. They've got 2 million Uyghurs that they have in concentration camps, and you saw the oppression of Hong Kong. So, of course, they're an authoritarian nation, and he is a dictator. I would do what I said earlier. I would encourage people to manufacture things here. I would talk about the threat that we are increasing by our growing dependence on China. I would unite the countries around China so that there's a united front, so that China knows that if they continue their aggression, there's going to be a consequence. It is true that we get a lot of our components from China. It's also true that China gets a lot of their money from us, from the West. And so the West has to show a united front that China will suffer economically if China continues its aggression.
And how would you resolve or de-thaw a Cold War with China?
I don't know that we can de-thaw a Cold War. I would fight the Cold War. I mean, eventually the Cold War resulted in the collapse of the Soviet Union, and hopefully eventually this Cold War against China will result in the change in government so that they no longer oppress their people and no longer are seeking to rule the world through authoritarian regime. authoritarian ways. So I don't know how you do anything other than square them off, face them down, let them know that there'll be an economic cost, a la what happened with the Soviet Union.
And I do now want to pivot a little bit more to another hot button issue, and that's abortion. And you spoke with my colleague for our Eye on Iowa segment just a few months ago, and you said you supported the overturning of Roe v. Wade. According to a recent poll, 57% of Americans oppose the 2022 Supreme Court decision, which effectively overturned Roe v. Wade. So hearing that stat, do you think you're out of step with the American people?
I think a lot of American people don't realize that all the overturning of Roe v. Wade did was put the matter back into the states, the way it was throughout our history until 1973, when the Supreme Court, in my opinion, incorrectly took up this issue. And if you feel one way or the other about it, it is your job to lobby your state lawmakers and pass laws that are consistent with how you see the issue. I happen to be pro-life, and I believe that women should have choices. I believe government's job is to protect the most vulnerable part of our society, and these are elderly people and children. And the pro-life community, in my opinion, not only talks the talk, but they walk the walk. There are pregnancy centers all over America that provide resources for women who are pregnant, and there are also probably 35 couples for every one child willing to adopt that child. And so women have choices, and it's my job as a member of the pro-life community to explain these kinds of choices to women.
When you're saying women have choices, are you saying abortion isn't one of those choices?
In my opinion, abortion is a crime. In my opinion, abortion is homicide, and I'm adamantly opposed to it. And I think that my job is to inform women that they have other alternatives other than abortion. And also, it's interesting to me that our side is often asked about this, but the other side is never asked or rarely asked. At what point do you feel an abortion has gone to the point where to abort a child is a crime? That question was never put to Gavin Newsom when I ran for governor, but I was asked repeatedly questions about life. But I said to reporters, did you ask Gavin Newsom at what point does he feel the pregnancy has gone so far? No one did. I recall during one of the debates, I think it was the 2020 debate, Bernie Sanders was asked this, and Bernie Sanders says it is up to the woman, really. So that means that you feel that Kermit Gosnell, the abortion doctor, Philadelphia abortion doctor, who's behind bars for performing late-term abortions at the request of women, should be set free, that he's a political prisoner. Nobody seems to ask the left these kinds of questions.
Well, I'm talking to a Republican now. That's why I'm asking you. And you are running for president. It is a top of mind issue for many voters. And you said that this is a state issue. So as president, would you support a federal abortion ban?
If it's a state issue, by definition, I wouldn't support a federal abortion ban. So no.
Okay, and I do now want to turn to your fellow contenders in the race. Donald Trump is far and away the front runner, as you know, as of now. And you did call yourself a big fan of Donald Trump. So what makes you the better contender?
I'm not running against Donald Trump. I'm not running against Ron DeSantis. I'm running against the Biden-Harris administration. We cannot take another 4 years of what they've done on borders, what they've done on the economy, what they've done on energy. That's why I am running. And I'm running to put the issues I mentioned to you before at the beginning of this interview front and center. And they are the epidemic of fatherlessness, the lie that America is systemically racist, the need for school choice. I've also been proposing an amendment to the Constitution to fix spending to a certain percentage of the GDP. Otherwise, government's going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger because much of the spending is on automatic pilot. And government has gotten bigger under Ronald Reagan. It got bigger under George Herbert Walker Bush. It got bigger under George W. Bush. It got bigger under Donald Trump. The only way to restrain spending is through a law that stops politicians from spending, because you don't run and win elections by saying you're going to take things away from people. So the only way to reduce government to the size the founding fathers intended is to force them through an amendment to the Constitution. The other issue I'm bringing to the table is something on my website, larryelder.com. It's called the Enforce the Law Act, and that's model legislation that states can adopt to set up commissions of retired judges and retired DAs to get rid of these soft on crime George Soros DAs. So that is why I'm running. I'm not running against any Republican. I'm running against the Biden-Harris administration, and I'm running to put the issues I just now mentioned front and center.
I know you said you aren't running against Donald Trump, but right now, according to a recent Fox News poll, he's polling at 56%, you're polling at 1%. So how do you overcome that?
by getting up on there on that debate stage in Milwaukee next month. I need to have 40,000 individual donors. You can go to my website, elderforpresident.com or larryelder.com. And once I get up there and I talk to the American people the way I just talked to you, then we'll see what happens. It's up to the American people. But I think once I get up there, game on, hold my beer.
Hold your beer, but do you think you are getting on the debate stage? I'll read out the requirements for the viewers who aren't aware of them. At least 40,000 donors, as you know, at least 1% in 3 polls, with 2 of those polls being national, and all 3 of those polls have to qualify with the RNC, and a pledge to support the Republican nominee. So where are you on the path to the debate stage as we sit just a month before it?
I'm working hard to get there. I intend to get there. I'm doing interviews. I'm putting out my issues. I'm urging people to go to my website, larryelder.com, and donate as little as $1 in order to get me on that debate stage. I intend to be there.
Larry Elder, I appreciate you coming on here today, and you are welcome back anytime. Thank you for joining me.
You know where to find me. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.